Welcome to WorldLand. Before we embark on our long trek across continents and centuries, take a moment to subscribe and join our global community of history lovers. Your presence here helps us keep these ancient stories alive. Now, extinguish the lights. Let the weight of the day leave your body. Adjust your pillows, close your eyes, and take a deep, slow breath. Tonight, we are not just observers. We are travelers in a giant caravan, carrying silk and secrets. We are about to cross the world on the legendary Silk Road. Let the desert sands guide you to sleep. Our journey begins in the year 130 BC, in the magnificent city of Chang'an. The morning mist is rising over the Yellow River, clinging to the towering pagodas and stone walls of the Han Dynasty's capital. You are standing at the western gate. Around you, the air is filled with the rhythmic sound of wooden carts and the soft jingle of camel bells. The scent of roasted grains and jasmine tea lingers in the cool air. This is the edge of the known world, and beyond these gates lies the vast, mysterious horizon of the West. As our caravan moves forward, the stone roads of the city fade into the soft, rhythmic crunch of gravel and sand. We are entering the Hexi Corridor, a narrow green passage between the cold, jagged peaks of the Chilean Mountains and the unforgiving dunes of the Gobi Desert. The pace is slow, steady, and hypnotic. You watch the rhythmic swaying of the camel in front of you. The sun begins to set, painting the landscape in hues of deep orange and dusty violet. In the silence of the twilight, the scholars in our group talk in hushed tones about the stars. They speak of how the Great Bear will guide us through the pathless wastes. This is the beginning of a 2,000-year bridge between East and West, a bridge made of silk, spices, and the restless dreams of humanity. For now, there is only the sound of the wind and the steady walk of the caravan. Rest your head, traveler. The desert is wide, and the night is young. The Great Wall is now far behind us, a fading line on the horizon. As the caravan moves deeper into the heart of Asia, the landscape begins to change. The lush greens of the east have been replaced by the infinite golds and browns of the Taklamakan Desert. They call this place the Sea of Death. But tonight, it is a sea of tranquility. The dunes rise and fall like frozen waves, carved by a wind that has been blowing since the dawn of time. Listen to the silence. It is not an empty silence, but a heavy, velvet quiet that wraps around you like a blanket. The only sound is the rhythmic puffing of the camels and the occasional clink of a brass bell. This rhythm is the heartbeat of the Silk Road. It has stayed the same for 2,000 years. It is slow, steady, and inevitable. The sun has disappeared completely now, leaving behind a sky so clear and vast that the stars feel close enough to touch. In our caravan, there are mathematicians and astronomers from distant lands. They look up at the constellation of Orion, tracing the same paths their ancestors used to find their way across these pathless sands. They whisper about the shape of the earth and the movement of the planets, sharing knowledge that will one day change the world. We are approaching a caravanserai, a desert fortress built of mud and stone. From a distance, it looks like a warm lantern in the dark. As we enter the high arched gates, the air becomes warmer. Here, travelers from India, Persia, and China gather around small fires. The smell of cedarwood smoke and cumin fills the courtyard. You find a quiet corner lined with thick, hand-woven carpets. The ground beneath you is solid and safe. As you lie back, you hear the distant howl of the desert wind outside the thick walls. But here, you are protected. In this sacred space for travelers, there are no borders, only stories. The Silk Road is not just a path of trade, it is a path of dreams. Close your eyes and let the warmth of the fire and the ancient whispers of the desert carry you into a deeper rest. We have many miles to go, but for now, you are exactly where you need to be. The desert sands eventually give way to the scent of river water and blooming orchards. We are entering Transoxiana, the land between the rivers. Rising from the horizon like a turquoise mirage is the city of Samarkand. Even in the dead of night, the city feels alive with a quiet, scholarly energy. The massive blue-tiled domes of the mosques and madrasas catch the moonlight, reflecting a shimmering azure light that seems to mirror the heavens above. As the caravan moves through the city's narrow, winding streets, the air changes. It is no longer dry and dusty. It is rich with the aroma of drying paper and old books. It was here, in these hidden courtyards, that the secret of paper-making was shared with the Western world. Imagine the thousands of scrolls being written at this very moment, books on medicine, mathematics, and the movement of the stars. In the stillness of Samarkand, the mind feels as vast as the desert we just crossed. We rest here by a stone fountain in a quiet garden. The sound of trickling water is a melody that lulls your senses. The scholars here are discussing the works of ancient Greeks and Indians, translating them into new languages, weaving a tapestry of human understanding. You realize that you are traveling not just across land, but across the collective memory of mankind. Every step forward is a step deeper into the knowledge of our ancestors. Leaving the blue domes behind, the caravan begins to climb. We are now ascending the rugged plateaus of Persia. The air grows thin and crisp. Below us, the valleys are shrouded in a thick silver mist. The pace of the camels slows as they navigate the rocky paths. Up here, the world feels incredibly old. You see the ruins of ancient fortresses carved into the cliffs, silent witnesses to empires that rose and fell long before we arrived. The night sky here is a deep obsidian black. Without the dust of the desert, the stars are piercingly bright. You find yourself gazing at the North Star, the unmoving point around which the entire universe seems to rotate. It is a comforting thought that no matter how far we wander, there is always a constant light to guide us home. The steady, rhythmic swaying of your caravan continues, a slow dance under the watchful eyes of the mountains. As the caravan descends from the high, shivering plateaus of Persia, the air begins to soften and warm. We are entering the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates. The rocky mountain paths have transformed into fertile plains, and the scent of wild jasmine and damp earth greets us. Even in the darkness, you can feel the life force of the great rivers nearby, flowing steadily toward the sea, just as they have for thousands of years. We pass through the outskirts of Baghdad, the city of peace. At this hour, the great house of wisdom is quiet, but its influence is everywhere. You can almost feel the weight of the millions of books housed within its walls, astronomical charts, medical treatises, and the poetry of the soul. The caravan moves past silent gardens where the date palms sway gently in the midnight breeze. The sound of the wind through the palm fronds is like a soft whisper, telling tales of the Babylonian kings and Sumerian dreamers who once walked this very ground. The ground beneath us is now rich and dark. We follow the curve of the river, the moonlight dancing on the ripples of the water like liquid silver. The pace is effortless now, the camels moving with a renewed grace on the flat, soft earth. You find yourself drifting into a state of deep reflection. You think of the spices we carry, cinnamon, cloves, and cardamom, whose scent has permeated every fiber of our clothes. These are not just goods. They are the flavors of distant worlds, destined to grace the tables of kings and commoners alike. Now, the landscape opens up once more. The rivers are behind us, and we are entering the vast Syrian desert. But this desert is different from the Gobi. It is a desert of basalt and history. We pass the silent ruins of Palmyra, where towering Roman columns stand like ghosts in the moonlight. They are the remnants of a queen's ambition, now home only to the shifting sands and the occasional desert fox. Walking through these ruins in the dead of night, you realize that time is the greatest traveler of all. The air begins to carry a new scent, a sharp, salty tang that wakes something deep in your spirit. It is the scent of the Mediterranean. We are approaching the edge of the continent. The long trek across the heart of the world is nearing its final chapter. The cities here are built of pale limestone that seems to glow with its own inner light. You hear the distant, muffled roar of the sea, a sound that promises an end to the dust and a beginning of the deep blue. As we reach the bustling ports of the Levant, the caravan finally comes to a halt. The heavy packs are unloaded from the weary camels, and for the first time in months, the rhythmic swaying stops. But the rhythm remains inside you. You lie down on a bed of fresh linens in a quiet inn overlooking the harbor. The sound of the waves hitting the stone piers is the ultimate lullaby. You have crossed deserts, mountains, and empires. You have carried the light of the East to the doorstep of the West. The world is smaller now, linked by the very footsteps you have taken. As you close your eyes for the final time tonight, the image of the long, winding road fades into a peaceful darkness. The journey is complete. The stars are still there, watching over the road, waiting for the next traveler. But for you, it is time to rest. Sleep now, for the Silk Road has brought you home. The blue tiles of Samarkand are now behind us, glowing like fading embers in the night. Our caravan moves toward the west, entering the vast and ancient heart of Persia. The path here is old, older than the empires that claim it. It is a land of high plateaus and hidden valleys, where the air is scented with the dry aroma of sage and ancient stone. The pace of our journey slows even further here. There is no rush. Time in this part of the world flows like deep, slow-moving water. As the camels climb the steady incline of the Iranian plateau, you can feel the temperature drop. The heat of the lowland deserts is a distant memory. Here, the night air is crisp and sharp, filling your lungs with a refreshing coolness. To our left, the Zagros Mountains rise like jagged giants against the star-filled sky. Their peaks are dusted with silver moonlight, looking like silent guardians watching over the weary travelers below. We stop for a moment at a small mountain spring. The sound of water bubbling from the rocks is the only noise in this immense cathedral of nature. The camels drink deeply, their steady breathing creating a soft mist in the cold air. You lean against a large, smooth boulder, feeling the coolness of the stone through your cloak. The scholars in our group gather nearby, their voices barely above a whisper. They are looking at the stars, pointing out the constellation of Cassiopeia. They discuss how the ancient Persians used these same stars to calculate the circumference of the earth, blending the poetry of the sky with the cold logic of mathematics. You listen to the rhythmic crunch of the gravel underfoot as we resume our walk. Every step is a heartbeat. We pass through small, sleeping villages made of sun-dried brick. The houses are quiet, their wooden doors shut tight against the night. You imagine the families inside, sleeping soundly, unaware of the caravan of silk and spices passing just meters from their pillows. The Silk Road is a river of life that flows while the rest of the world dreams. In the distance, the silhouette of a lonely watchtower appears on a ridge. These towers have stood for centuries, once signaling with fires from China to the Mediterranean. Now, they are silent monuments to the connectivity of man. As we pass beneath its shadow, you feel a profound sense of peace. The road is long, yes, but it is also a teacher. It teaches patience. It teaches endurance. And most of all, it teaches us that every destination is just the beginning of a new story. The caravan begins its slow descent into the valleys of Mesopotamia. The air grows heavier and warmer once more. You can smell the distant fragrance of orange groves and the damp, rich silt of the great rivers. The stars seem to shift, leaning toward the horizon as the night deepens. You are safe. You are part of a tradition that has lasted for millennia. Let the steady, swaying motion of the caravan cradle your thoughts. There are still many nights ahead of us, and each one is a gift of silence. The descent into the Mesopotamian basin feels like entering a warm embrace. The jagged edges of the Persian mountains soften into rolling hills, and then into the flattest, richest plains you have ever seen. This is the land of the two rivers, the cradle where humanity first learned to write its name in the clay. The air here is different. It is thick with the history of 10,000 years. You can smell the life-giving mud of the Tigris, a scent that is both primal and comforting. As the moon hangs high over the palm groves, we approach the ruins of ancient Babylon. Even in silence, the Ishtar Gate seems to shimmer in your mind with its lost indigo tiles. The caravan moves past the great mounds of earth that were once ziggurats, ladders to the heavens. You look up and realize that the astronomers of this land were the first to map the zodiac, the first to divide the circle into 360 degrees. The science of the ancients is literally beneath your feet. The pace of the camels becomes a hypnotic slow-motion dance on the soft river silt. We pass a line of date palms, their feathered fronds casting long, skeletal shadows across the path. The sound of the river water lapping against the banks is a constant, low-frequency hum that vibrates in your chest. It is the sound of time itself. Here, in the heart of the Fertile Crescent, you feel a deep connection to every traveler who has ever passed this way. The soldiers of Alexander, the merchants of the Abbasids, and the dreamers of today. We rest for the night near an old stone bridge. The scholars in the caravan, light a single, small lantern. They are not looking at maps anymore, but at the river's flow. They speak of the irrigation systems, the complex mathematics required to divert the water to the thirsty fields. It is a reminder that the Silk Road was not just about luxury goods, but about the flow of engineering, the spread of medicine, and the sharing of the very laws that govern civilization. As you close your eyes, you can almost hear the ghostly echoes of the ancient bazaars, the phantom haggling of merchants from 3 millennia ago. But those sounds are far away now. In the present, there is only the rhythmic breathing of the resting camels and the gentle rustle of the reeds in the river breeze. The warmth of the Mesopotamian night is like a heavy silk veil, pulling you deeper into a state of total relaxation. The warmth of the river plains slowly fades as the caravan turns toward the northwest. We are entering the rugged, sun-drenched highlands of Anatolia. The ground changes from soft silt to hard limestone and red volcanic earth. This is a land of ancient secrets, where the Hittites and the Luwians once carved their empires into the very bones of the mountains. The climb into the Taurus Mountains is the most meditative part of our journey. The path winds through narrow limestone gorges that amplify the sound of the wind. It is a high, whistling sound, like a flute played by the earth itself. The camels move with careful, deliberate steps, their padded feet gripping the weathered stone. You find yourself matching your breath to their pace, slow, deep, and steady. As we reach a high mountain pass, the entire world seems to open up beneath us. To the north, the rolling steppes of the Anatolian interior. To the south, the distant, invisible promise of the Mediterranean. The air up here is incredibly pure. It tastes of snow and pine needles. We pass a nomadic camp, their black goat hair tents huddled against the lee of a cliff. A small fire flickers in the center of the camp, a tiny orange spark in a world of blue and silver moonlight. The scholars stop to examine a Roman milestone, half buried in the earth. They trace the Latin inscriptions with their fingers, discussing the incredible engineering of the roads that once linked this remote pass to the heart of Rome. They talk about the spread of ideas, how Greek philosophy traveled east to Persia, and how Indian mathematics traveled west to the Mediterranean. You realize that you are walking on a giant conveyor belt of human thought. The night on the Anatolian plateau is silent in a way that is almost physical. There are no trees to rustle, no rivers to hum. There is only the vastness of the sky and the cold, magnificent presence of the stars. You wrap your wool cloak tighter around your shoulders, feeling the warmth of your own body. This contrast, the cold air and the warm cloak, is the perfect recipe for sleep. It is the feeling of being protected in the middle of the wilderness. As the caravan begins its final descent toward the coast, the scent of the mountains starts to mix with something new. It is the smell of wild thyme and sage, crushed under the feet of the camels. It is a dry, herbal fragrance that clears the mind and relaxes the soul. The path is becoming easier now, the slopes more gentle. You can sense that the long 2,000-mile trek is reaching its crescendo, but there is no need to wake. The sea is waiting, and the road has already given you everything you need. The mountains of the Taurus are now behind the caravan, and the landscape begins to soften into the rolling hills of western Anatolia. The red earth of the interior gives way to fertile valleys filled with ancient olive groves. Even in the dead of night, the silvery leaves of the olive trees shimmer like millions of tiny mirrors under the full moon. The air here is no longer sharp and cold. It has become soft, humid, and heavy with the scent of ripening figs and wild lavender. The rhythmic swaying of the camels continues as we pass through the ruins of Sardis. The massive stone columns of the Temple of Artemis stand tall and silent, casting long, dark shadows across the ancient royal road. You can hear the distant, muffled sound of a stream flowing over smooth pebbles, the Pactolus River, where legends say the sands were once made of gold. The caravan doesn't stop, and neither does the steady, hypnotic pace of the journey. Every step is a heartbeat, every mile a deeper layer of relaxation. As we move further west, the vegetation becomes denser. We are passing through forests of pine and cedar. The scent of wood resin is intoxicating, a clean and woody fragrance that fills your senses and eases any remaining tension in your body. In the gaps between the trees, you catch glimpses of the stars, which are now lower on the horizon, guiding us toward the sea. The scholars in the group are quiet tonight, lulled into a meditative trance by the sheer constancy of the road. The path now leads us to the Great Sea, the Mediterranean. The first sound you hear is not the wind, but the low, rhythmic roar of the waves hitting the distant cliffs. It is a deep, bass sound that vibrates through the earth and into the feet of the camels. The salt in the air is unmistakable now, a sharp and bracing scent that clears your mind. We are approaching Ephesus, the marble city. The streets here are paved with massive white stones that have been polished to a shine by the feet of millions of travelers before us. The caravan moves silently through the Arcadian Way, the long street that leads to the harbor. The Library of Celsus stands at the end of the road, its ornate facade illuminated by the moon. Even now, you can sense the millions of scrolls kept within its walls, the collective wisdom of the Ionian world. But we do not linger. Our destination is the harbor, where the wooden masts of hundreds of ships sway in the dark, looking like a leafless forest on the water. We board a large merchant galley, a vessel built of stout oak and cedar. The camels are led onto the ship with practiced ease, and the heavy bales of silk and spices are stowed deep in the hold. As the ship leaves the harbor and enters the open sea, the motion of the journey changes. The rhythmic swaying of the camel is replaced by the slow, majestic rolling of the waves. The creaking of the wooden hull is a new melody, a deep and rhythmic groan that tells of the strength of the ship. The stars above are clearer than ever, reflecting on the black surface of the water so that it feels as if the ship is floating through the galaxy itself. We are sailing toward the west, toward the ports of Italy and the heart of the Roman world. The air is cool and wet, spraying a fine mist over the deck. You find a quiet spot near the bow, wrapped in your cloak, listening to the rhythmic splash of the oars hitting the water. Day and night merge into one long blue dream as we cross the Aegean. We pass the silhouettes of jagged islands, Chios, Samos, and Delos, each one a temple of marble and myth floating in the dark. The sailors talk in low voices about the currents and the winds, their knowledge of the sea as deep and ancient as the scholars' knowledge of the stars. This is the final leg of the great bridge between the east and the west. The silk that started its journey in the humid forests of China is now breathing the salt air of the Mediterranean. The ship eventually rounds the southern tip of Greece, entering the Ionian Sea. The water here is deeper, a dark indigo that seems to hold the shadows of the entire world. The rolling of the ship becomes even slower, even more profound. You feel the immense weight of the ocean beneath you, a silent and powerful force that carries you forward without effort. There is nothing for you to do but listen to the wind in the rigging and the steady, heartbeat-like thud of the waves against the bow. As the coast of Italy finally appears on the horizon, a line of dark hills against a violet sky, the journey feels as if it has reached its natural conclusion. But the road never truly ends. It only changes form. The Appian Way awaits us, the queen of roads, built of basalt and ambition, leading straight to the gates of Rome. The marble villas of the coast pass by like ghosts in the night, their gardens smelling of rosemary and pine. The caravan, now back on solid ground, begins its final trek. The stone road is perfectly straight, a line of logic cut through the wild landscape. The sound of the camel's feet on the basalt stones is a crisp, rhythmic clicking that echoes through the quiet countryside. We are passing through the tombs of the ancients that line the road, silent monuments to the generations who built this world. The air is still, the wind has died down, and the only sound is the movement of the silk and the steady breath of the travelers. We reach the gates of the city as the stars begin to fade into the first pale light of dawn. The journey of 2,000 years and 10,000 miles is over. The silk will be sold in the markets, the spices will season the feasts of the emperors, and the stories we carried will be whispered in the halls of power. But for you, the journey has achieved its true purpose. The road has led you into the deepest, most peaceful silence. The world is at rest, the journey is complete, and the stars have done their work. The gates of Rome stand open, welcoming the silk and spices that have traveled across the spine of the world. As the caravan enters the Suburra, the city is caught in the blue, silent hour before dawn. The massive limestone blocks of the Colosseum loom in the distance like a mountain of bone, and the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, old stone, and the distant, briny breath of the Tiber River. The pace here is even slower. The camel's padded feet sound like rhythmic heartbeats on the basalt paving stones of the Appian Way. We move past the grand villas of the Palatine Hill, where the gardens are heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine and dark cypress trees. In these silent halls, the silk from the east will soon be draped over the shoulders of senators and poets. But for now, it remains bundled tight, carrying with it the dust of the Gobi and the salt of the Aegean. You can hear the distant clatter of a night watchman's sandals and the soft hoot of an owl from the ruins of the Forum. This is the heart of the Western world, a city that feels as if it has always existed and will never truly disappear. The scholars in our caravan do not look at the gold or the marble. They are drawn to the great libraries, where the scrolls of Alexandria have found a second home. In the quiet courtyards, they speak of the Roman engineers who built aqueducts that span across valleys like the webs of giant stone spiders. They discuss the Greek medicine that is being translated into Latin, a bridge of knowledge that ensures the wisdom of the East will survive in the cold climes of the West. The flow of ideas is as constant and unstoppable as the flow of the river itself. But the Silk Road is a circle, not a line. After weeks of rest in the shadow of the 7 hills, the caravan prepares for the long journey back toward the rising sun. This time, we will not follow the sea. We will head north, through the dense, dark forests of the Danube and toward the vast golden steppes of the Scythians. The air changes quickly as we leave the Mediterranean behind. The humidity of the coast is replaced by the dry, grassy scent of the open plains. The sound of the journey changes as well. The clicking of feet on stone is replaced by the soft, muffled thud of hooves and paws on wild grass. We are entering the great northern corridor, a land of infinite horizons, where the sky feels twice as large as it did in the south. The wind here is a constant companion, a low-frequency hum that sings through the tall grasses. It is a lonely sound, but also a deeply peaceful one. There are no walls here, no gates, only the endless green sea of the steppe. As the moon rises over the Hazar, the great inland sea, the water looks like a sheet of hammered silver. We pass the camps of the nomads, their felt yurts glowing like lanterns against the dark earth. The scent of boiling sheep's milk and burning birch wood drifts on the breeze. These people have no permanent cities, yet they are the masters of the road. Their knowledge of the terrain, the weather, and the stars is written in their songs. You listen to the distant, haunting melody of a bone flute, a sound that seems to vibrate with the very soul of the earth. The caravan moves through the iron gates, the narrow mountain passes that lead back toward the heart of Asia. The stars here are piercingly bright, cold diamonds set in an obsidian sky. You feel the immense age of the mountains, their rocky peaks weathered by eons of wind and ice. The pace is steady, unhurried, a rhythmic march that transcends time. You are no longer just a traveler. You are a part of the wind, a part of the grass, a part of the infinite road that links all of humanity together. As we descend toward the Aral, the air becomes dry once more, smelling of salt and ancient dust. The landscape is a mosaic of pale blues and dusty oranges. We are moving toward the great markets of the north, where the fir of the Siberian forests meets the jade of the Kunlun mountains. The journey is a constant exchange, a never-ending cycle of giving and taking, of learning and teaching. You find yourself drifting into a state of total stillness, your mind as clear and vast as the northern sky. The road continues, stretching out toward the dawn. Every mile is a memory, every night a sanctuary. There is no beginning and no end, only the steady, rhythmic movement of the caravan under the watchful eyes of the stars. The world is at peace, the path is clear, and the silence of the steppe is the greatest lullaby ever written. Let your thoughts fade into the golden grass, and let the wind carry you toward the morning. The caravan departed from the northern gates of Rome as the summer heat began to thicken the air of the Tiber Valley. The path led through the dense forests of the Danube, where the sunlight barely touched the moss-covered ground. The wooden wheels of the supply wagons groaned under the weight of Roman glassware and Baltic amber, destined for the courts of the East. The transition from the paved Roman roads to the soft, loamy soil of the barbarian lands changed the sound of the march. The sharp clicking of hooves was replaced by a dull, rhythmic thud that echoed through the ancient oak trees. As the months passed, the forests thinned into the vast, undulating plains of the Pontic steppe. Here, the landscape was dominated by tall, silver grasses that moved in waves under the constant northern wind. The caravan moved with a new urgency, crossing the great river systems of the Dnieper and the Don. These water crossings were slow and perilous, requiring the construction of temporary rafts and the careful guidance of the camels through the cold, swirling currents. The air grew drier, smelling of wild thyme and sun-scorched earth, signaling the beginning of the Central Asian corridor. In the heart of the steppe, the caravan encountered the great nomadic confederations. Trade was conducted in the shadow of massive earthen mounds, the kurgans of ancient kings. Gold jewelry was exchanged for sturdy horses, and the scholars of the group sat with the tribal elders to study the stars of the northern hemisphere. The sky here was an immense, unbroken dome, where the Milky Way appeared as a thick, luminous river of white light. The movement of the caravan became a test of endurance against the elements. The sudden dust storms that turned the day into an orange twilight, and the freezing nights, where the dew turned to a layer of frost on the silk bundles. The route then turned toward the foothills of the Altai Mountains, the Golden Mountains, where the borders of empires faded into the clouds. The ascent was steep, forcing the caravan to move in a long, single file along narrow ridges carved by glaciers. To the north, the Siberian taiga stretched out like a dark, infinite carpet. To the south, the burning basins of the Tarim awaited. The soundscape was filled with the cry of mountain eagles and the roar of snow-fed torrents cascading down granite cliffs. Here, the caravan masters studied the rock formations, looking for the veins of lapis lazuli and jade that had been traded along these paths for millennia. As the descent began, the air became thick with the fine, powdery dust of the Taklamakan Desert once again. But this time, the caravan approached from the north, passing through the oasis cities of Turpan and Hami. These were cities of fire and ice, where ancient underground irrigation systems, the qanats, brought melted snow from the mountains to orchards of grapes and melons. The architecture here was a fusion of Buddhist grottos and Persian brickwork, where the walls were covered in murals depicting travelers from every corner of the known world. The caravan moved through the Jade Gate, the final fortress before the heart of the Middle Kingdom. The path was lined with the bleached bones of those who had failed to cross the sands, a grim reminder of the road's power. Inside the fortress, the officials inspected the seals on the silk bales, documenting the return of the treasures. The air smelled of wood smoke and old paper. The scholars in the group began to organize their journals, recording the mathematical formulas they had gathered in Rome and the botanical samples from the Anatolian highlands. The final stretch led through the Hexi corridor, the narrow valley protected by the Great Wall. The sound of the march was now accompanied by the distant rhythm of drums from the garrison towers. The landscape was a mosaic of yellow loess hills and green river valleys. As the familiar pagodas of Chang'an appeared on the horizon, the caravan slowed to its most deliberate pace. The journey had lasted 3 years. The camels were lean, their coats weathered by the salt of the sea and the frost of the mountains, but the cargo was intact. The arrival at the western markets was a chaos of color and sound. The silk was unrolled, revealing patterns that had been inspired by the mosaics of Rome. The spices were weighed on bronze scales, their fragrance filling the humid air of the capital. The scholars presented their star maps to the imperial astronomers, showing the shift in the constellations as seen from the shores of the Atlantic. The circle was complete. The east and the west had looked into each other's eyes once again, linked by the thin, unbreakable thread of the road. The sunset over the Yellow River marked the end of the expedition. The animals were led to the imperial stables, and the travelers dispersed into the labyrinthine streets of the city. The road remained, a silent and eternal entity, waiting for the next season, the next caravan, and the next dreamers who would dare to cross the world. The heavy iron-studded gates of Rome's northern wall creaked open slowly, their hinges protesting against the morning humidity of the Tiber Valley. The caravan did not rush. The first mile took nearly an hour as the animals adjusted to the weight of the Roman glassware, encased in thick layers of straw and damp linen. The lead merchant, a man whose skin was as weathered as the parchment he carried, checked the alignment of the wooden axles on the heavy supply wagons. Each rotation of the wheels produced a low, rhythmic groan that would become the primary soundtrack for the next 1,000 miles. The path led through the dense shadows of the Apennine foothills. Here, the canopy of oak and beech trees was so thick that the sun appeared only as occasional, blinding needles of light piercing through the emerald gloom. The ground was a carpet of decaying leaves and damp moss, which muffled the sound of the camels' footsteps, turning the march into a silent, ghostly procession. Every few miles, the caravan passed a weathered stone shrine, where the scent of old incense clung to the cracks in the marble. The travelers did not speak. They listened to the internal rhythm of the forest, the scuttle of a lizard in the dry brush, the distant tap of a woodpecker, and the steady, heavy breathing of the burdened beasts. By the time the caravan reached the banks of the Danube, the air had turned sharp and metallic, carrying the scent of mountain snow and cold, fast-moving water. The river was a vast, slate-gray serpent cutting through the wilderness. The process of crossing was an arduous display of ancient engineering. The travelers spent days gathering fallen timber to reinforce the flat-bottomed ferry boats. They watched the water's surface, studying the eddies and swirls that signaled hidden rocks beneath. The animals were led onto the planks one by one, their hooves clattering sharply against the wood, a sound that echoed across the water and disappeared into the vast, silent forests on the far bank. Once across, the landscape opened into the limitless expanse of the Pontic steppe. This was a world of horizontal lines, where the earth and sky met in a blur of hazy violet. The grass here was waist-high, a sea of silver-green steepa that hissed like 1,000 snakes as the wind swept across it. The caravan moved into this void, guided not by roads, but by the position of the North Star and the ancient burial mounds that rose from the flat earth like the knees of buried giants. The heat of the afternoon was a physical weight, smelling of sun-baked earth and the bitter tang of wild wormwood. The rhythm of life on the steppe was dictated by the search for water. Each evening, the scouts would venture miles ahead, looking for the telltale sign of a line of willow trees that marked a hidden stream. When a camp was finally established, the sound of the wind in the tall grass was the only company. The scholars in the caravan spent their nights documenting the flora of the plains, pressing delicate blue cornflowers and wild garlic between the pages of their journals. They noted the way the soil changed from the black earth of the river basins to the pale, sandy loess of the interior. As the weeks turned into months, the caravan encountered the first of the nomadic horsemen. These encounters were silent affairs of mutual observation. The nomads, dressed in heavy felt tunics and leather trousers, traded wheels of hard, salty cheese and fermented mare's milk for small bundles of Roman pepper and cinnamon. The exchange was done with few words, the value of the goods measured by weight and the glint of the eyes. The scent of the campfires, bitter birch smoke and dried dung, stayed with the caravan for days, clinging to the silk robes and the camel's fur. The geography began to change as the caravan approached the shores of the Caspian Sea. The horizon was no longer just grass, but a shimmering, unstable line of white salt flats. The air became heavy with the scent of brine and decaying seaweed. They moved across the Ustjurt Plateau, a desolate world of chalk cliffs and deep canyons that looked like the scars of a forgotten war. The soundscape here was dominated by the wind, which howled through the limestone arches with a hollow, flute-like whistle. The camels' pace slowed as they navigated the treacherous, crumbling paths, their breath coming in short, rhythmic puffs in the cooling evening air. At the edge of the great inland sea, the caravan stopped to rest. The water was a dark obsidian mirror, reflecting a sky so crowded with stars that there was no room for darkness. The travelers sat by the water's edge, watching the phosphorescent glow of the waves. They spoke in hushed tones about the mapmakers of the West, who believed this sea was an arm of the great world ocean, and the merchants of the East, who knew it was a closed universe of its own. They discussed the minerals found in the cliffs, veins of gypsum and translucent alabaster, noting how the light of the moon seemed to pass right through the stone. The journey then turned toward the Iron Gates, the narrow mountain passes that led into the heart of Central Asia. The ascent was a grueling climb through narrow gorges, where the sun only reached the floor for an hour each day. The sound of the caravan was trapped between the vertical rock walls, creating a constant, low-frequency rumble. The air smelled of cold stone and the dampness of hidden springs. They passed the ruins of ancient guard towers, built by empires that had long since crumbled into the dust, their foundations now home to nothing but mountain eagles and the occasional snow leopard. The caravan moved eastward from the salt-crusted shores of the Caspian, leaving behind the damp, briny air for the scorched, absolute dryness of the Kizilkum Desert. This was the Red Sand, a landscape that lived up to its name as the sun began to descend, turning the dunes into waves of frozen fire. The rhythm of the march changed here. To avoid the peak heat of the day, the travelers began to move primarily during the twilight and the deep hours of the night. The sound of the desert was a heavy, expectant silence, broken only by the rhythmic, sand-muffled thud of the camels' feet and the occasional metallic clink of a loose harness. Each step stirred a fine, rose-colored dust that hung in the air like a stationary mist, illuminated by the cold, indifferent light of the stars. The transition into the desert heart was marked by the gradual disappearance of all landmarks. The horizon became a perfect, unbroken circle, where the deep indigo of the sky met the pale crimson of the dunes. The air was so dry that it felt brittle, smelling of ancient dust and the faint, bitter scent of Saxaul wood. These twisted, leafless trees were the only life forms that dared to exist in this void, their roots reaching deep into the earth to find the memories of water. The caravan masters moved with a calculated precision, their eyes constantly scanning the shifting patterns of the sand for the subtle ripples that indicated a change in the wind's direction. A shift in the wind meant a shift in the path, and in the Kizilkum, the path was a living, breathing thing that could be erased in a single afternoon. At midnight, the caravan would often pause for a few hours of rest in the shadow of a massive, horseshoe-shaped dune. The heat would radiate back out from the sand, a gentle warmth that fought against the creeping chill of the desert night. The scholars used this time to adjust their instruments, astrolabes made of burnished brass and bone, measuring the angle of the star canopus against the horizon. They spoke in whispers, their voices swallowed by the immense emptiness of the landscape. They discussed the geological history of the basin, noting the presence of fossilized seashells embedded in the limestone outcroppings, a silent testament to a time millions of years ago when this red wasteland was the floor of a vast prehistoric ocean. This realization that they were walking across a vanished sea added a layer of profound stillness to their journey. As they approached the southern reaches of the Aral Sea, the geography shifted once more. The sand gave way to a vast, cracked clay plain known as the Takir. The sound of the march changed from a muffled thud to a crisp, rhythmic crunching as the animals' hooves broke the sun-baked crust of the earth. In the distance, the first glimpses of water appeared, not a mirage, but the deep, sapphire-blue expanse of the Aral. In this era, the sea was a thriving, magnificent body of water, its shores lined with dense thickets of reeds and willow trees. The air became cooler and smelled of fresh water, damp earth, and the sharp tang of wild mint. The caravan followed the coastline for days, passing through small, isolated fishing villages built of sun-dried mud and reed mats. The soundscape was now filled with the cries of thousands of migratory birds, pelicans, herons, and wild geese, that used the Aral as a sanctuary in the middle of the desert. The villagers traded dried sturgeon and woven reed baskets for small measures of Roman glass and Anatolian wool. The exchange was a slow, deliberate ritual, conducted with a quiet dignity that matched the pace of the sea. The travelers watched the local fishermen move across the water in narrow, high-prowed boats, their oars creating rhythmic ripples that caught the silver light of the moon. Beyond the Aral, the caravan entered the Transoxiana region, the land between the great rivers of the Oxus and the Jaxartes. This was a world of complex irrigation and ancient gardens. They passed through the outskirts of Khiva, a city of towering mud-brick walls and turquoise-tiled minarets that seemed to pierce the sky like needles. The air here was rich and fragrant, smelling of ripening apricots, mulberries, and the sweet smoke of fruitwood fires. The architecture was a marvel of cooling geometry, deep, shaded courtyards with central pools of water that reflected the intricate patterns of the brickwork. The sound of trickling water was everywhere, a constant musical accompaniment to the rustle of the wind in the mulberry trees. The scholars in the group were drawn to the local madrasas, where the air was thick with the scent of old parchment and beeswax candles. They observed the local mathematicians as they worked on complex calculations involving the movement of the planets and the principles of algebra. The exchange of knowledge was seamless. The Roman scrolls of geometry were laid out alongside Persian treatises on optics and Indian maps of the stars. It was a moment of absolute intellectual harmony, where the differences of language and religion were secondary to the shared pursuit of understanding the universe. The caravan remained in the city for weeks, allowing the animals to recover their strength in the lush, green pastures outside the walls, where the grass was thick and sweet with the silt of the great rivers. When the journey resumed, the caravan turned toward the southeast, heading toward the majestic, snow-capped peaks of the Pamirs. The transition from the humid gardens of Transoxiana to the high-altitude deserts was a slow, grueling ascent. The air became thinner and colder, and the rich scents of the oasis were replaced by the clean, sterile smell of mountain granite and ice. The pace of the march slowed to a crawl as the path wound through narrow, boulder-strewn canyons where the sun only reached the floor for a few minutes each day. The sound of the caravan was trapped between the vertical rock walls, creating a constant, low-frequency rumble that felt like the heartbeat of the mountains themselves. The travelers wrapped themselves in heavy furs and wool cloaks, their breath creating small clouds of mist in the frigid air. They watched the light of the setting sun hit the peaks of the roof of the world, turning the snow into a brilliant, blinding gold. This was a land of silence and scale, where the individual felt small and insignificant against the backdrop of the eternal mountains. Yet the march continued, a steady, unbreakable chain of life moving across the high passes, driven by the same restless curiosity that had first led them away from the gates of Rome. Every mile was a victory over the elements, a testament to the endurance of the road and the people who walked it. The ascent into the Pamir Mountains, the legendary roof of the world, marked the most grueling and silent phase of the entire 3-year journey. As the caravan moved higher into the thin, crystalline air, the lush greenery of Transoxiana became a distant, colorful memory. Here, the landscape was a monochrome study in slate gray, obsidian black, and the blinding eternal white of the glaciers. The path was no more than a precarious ledge carved into the vertical granite walls, where a single misstep would lead to a 1,000-foot drop into the turquoise, ice-choked rivers below. The soundscape was dominated by the voice of the peaks, a low, constant thrumming of the wind as it compressed through the narrow canyons, sounding like a distant choir of ghosts. Each breath taken by the travelers felt sharp and metallic, a cold fire that filled their lungs and slowed their movements to a rhythmic, meditative crawl. At the highest point of the Wakjir Pass, where the air was so thin that the stars remained visible even during the bright, pale hours of the noon, the caravan paused to pay tribute to the spirit of the mountains. The ground here was a frozen mosaic of jagged shale and ancient ice that had never known the warmth of a summer sun. The travelers moved with a deliberate, slow-motion grace, their heavy wool and fur cloaks dragging against the ground with a soft, rhythmic friction. They watched as the mountain eagles circled in the updrafts, their shadows moving across the snow like silent, dark omens. The silence was so profound that one could hear the microscopic cracking of the ice as it shifted under the weight of the seasons. The scholars noted the unique geology of the pass, collecting samples of translucent quartz and dark, iron-rich hematite, realizing that these very stones were the silent witnesses to every traveler who had ever bridged the gap between the east and the west. The descent from the Pamirs toward the Tarim Basin was a slow transition from the vertical to the horizontal world. As the altitude dropped, the sharp, sterile smell of the heights was replaced by the dry, powdery scent of the desert loess. In the distance, the oasis city of Kashgar appeared like a verdant mirage against the backdrop of the towering Kunlun Range. This was the great crossroads of the Silk Road, where the northern and southern routes converged in a symphony of trade and culture. The architecture of the city was a marvel of cooling mud brick and intricate wood carving, with streets that were permanently shaded by trellises of grapevines and mulberry trees. The air was thick with the scent of roasted mutton, cumin, and the sweet, heavy fragrance of sun-dried apricots. The sound of the city was a rhythmic tapestry of blacksmiths' hammers, the splashing of water in the stone fountains, and the melodic, multilingual haggling of the great Sunday market. In the quiet courtyards of the caravanserais, the travelers rested for weeks, allowing the camels to heal their split hooves and regain their strength on a diet of alfalfa and clover. The scholars spent their days in the local libraries, which were housed in deep, cool basements to protect the fragile scrolls from the desert heat. They observed the local silk weaving process, a hypnotic display of geometry and patience. They watched as the weavers moved the wooden shuttles back and forth with a rhythmic, percussive thud, creating patterns that blended Persian floral motifs with the geometric precision of Greek mosaics. The exchange of information here was constant. The Roman techniques for glass blowing were discussed alongside the Chinese methods for deep well drilling. It was a moment of absolute synthesis, where the collective knowledge of the world was being woven into a single, unbreakable fabric. As the caravan prepared for the final leg across the northern rim of the Taklamakan Desert, the air began to carry the dry electric charge of the shifting sands. The horizon to the east was a hazy, amber blur, where the desert sky met the sun-scorched earth. The travelers packed their water skins with a renewed focus, knowing that the place of no return awaited them. The sound of the departing caravan was a slow, funeral-like procession of bells and footsteps, a rhythmic promise that they would continue until the very end. The city of Kashgar faded into the dust behind them, its turquoise domes glowing in the twilight like the last embers of a dying fire. They were moving toward the heart of the empire, carrying with them the silence of the mountains and the secrets of the West. The path along the northern rim of the Taklamakan Desert followed a string of isolated oasis cities, Aksu, Kucha, and Turpan, each a fragile pocket of life held together by the ancient Kharez system. These were subterranean canals that channeled the melted snow from the Tian Shan Mountains through miles of hand-dug tunnels, protected from the evaporating heat of the sun. The sound of water moving underground was a constant subterranean hum that the travelers could feel through the soles of their feet as they walked across the parched, cracked earth. The landscape was a study in extremes. To the left, the dark, forested slopes of the Celestial Mountains rose into the clouds, and to the right, the infinite shifting dunes of the Taklamakan roared like a silent ocean. The air smelled of salt flats, parched clay, and the occasional intoxicating scent of a blossoming almond grove hidden within a walled garden. In the Turpan Depression, the lowest and hottest point of the journey, the caravan moved only during the hours of the deep moon. The sand here was a fine, powdery silk that muffled all sound, turning the march into a dreamlike, weightless experience. The travelers watched the phenomenon of the singing sands, where the wind moving across the dunes created a low, vibrating drone that sounded like the distant beating of a drum. The scholars documented the unique agriculture of the region, noting how the heat was harnessed to produce grapes of extraordinary sweetness, which were dried in ventilated mud brick towers. They discussed the principles of thermodynamics as they observed the natural cooling effects of the wind towers, realizing that the survival of these cities was a testament to 1,000 years of scientific observation and adaptation. The approach to the Jade Gate, the Yumen Guan, marked the official entry into the territories of the Middle Kingdom. This was a massive, square fortress of rammed earth and stone, standing as a solitary sentinel at the edge of the wilderness. The sound of the wind through the gate's high arches was a mournful, hollow whistle that seemed to carry the voices of all the soldiers and merchants who had stood there before. The bureaucratic process of entry was a slow and rhythmic ritual. The imperial officials inspected each bale of silk, each crate of glassware, and each scroll of parchment with a silent, meticulous focus. The air here was different. It smelled of old ink, damp paper, and the wood smoke of the garrison fires. The transition from the lawless freedom of the steppe to the structured order of the empire was felt in every movement, every word, and every heartbeat. Beyond the Jade Gate lay the Gansu Corridor, a narrow valley of green riverbanks and yellow Loess hills squeezed between the Gobi Desert and the Kilian Mountains. The path was lined with the towers of the Great Wall, a rhythmic succession of stone and earth that stretched toward the horizon like the spine of a sleeping dragon. The sound of the caravan was now accompanied by the distant rhythmic thud of the garrison drums, signaling the passage of the day. The travelers passed the Mogao caves near Dunhuang, where the cliffs were honeycombed with thousands of painted chambers. In the flickering light of the beeswax candles, they saw the history of the Silk Road painted on the walls, the very journey they had just completed, immortalized in mineral pigments of lapis lazuli and malachite. The realization that they were a living part of this eternal cycle of movement brought a profound sense of peace to the weary group. The final stretch through the Wei River Valley was a sensory homecoming. The dry, dusty air of the west was replaced by the humid, fertile breath of the heartland. The landscape was a mosaic of terraced rice paddies and flooded wheat fields, where the water reflected the soft, gray light of the overcast sky. The soundscape was now a busy, complex melody of water wheels turning in the river, the calls of farmers to their water buffalo, and the rhythmic clatter of wooden carts on the stone roads. As the massive, gray brick walls of Chang'an finally appeared on the horizon, the caravan slowed to its final, most deliberate pace. The journey of 12,000 miles and 3 long years was measured in the last few hundred steps toward the western market. The arrival was not marked by fanfare, but by the quiet, heavy weight of completion. As the camels knelt for the final time in the shadow of the great wild goose pagoda, the silence that followed was absolute. The silk from the east and the glass from the west were laid out on the wooden stalls, the physical manifestation of a bridge that spanned the world. The scholars handed over their journals to the imperial archives, ensuring that the mathematics of Rome and the star maps of Persia would be woven into the future of the empire. The circle was closed. The road remained, a silent and eternal entity under the shifting stars, waiting for the next dawn, the next traveler, and the next dream. The journey was over, the world was linked, and the silence of the night was the only story that remained.